a fixed set of nuclei where we will optimize, for which we will optimize the electronic coordinates. So these kind of methods are called as the electronic structure methods, where we will be solving the time-independent Schrodinger equation, which is the normal eigenvalue equation xi is equals to E psi. Whereas the second scenario includes for the moving nuclei, where we will be considering the optimization of the electronic coordinates for at each and every nuclear time step. So these kind of methods are called as nuclear dynamics methods, and we will be using either the time-dependent Schrodinger equation or with various approximations, its variants, in order to simulate the nuclear dynamics methods. For the purpose of the today's presentation, we can consider or we can divide this non-adiabatic dynamics methods into two ways. The first one is the adiabatic dynamics methods, where the wave function can be represented as a single potential energy surface. In other words, the nuclear motion is governed only by a single potential energy surface. Whereas the non-adiabatic dynamics methods include the expansion of the wave function, or we can say that the wave function cannot be represented by a single potential energy surface. There we need to have more, the wave function is like a superposition of more than one potential energy surface, and accordingly the nuclear motion is governed by many potential energy surfaces. While there are several software packages in order to simulate the adiabatic dynamics, simulating the non-adiabatic, the on-the-fly implementation of non-adiabatic dynamics methods is pretty scarce. And as I will be showing, we have implemented one of the non-adiabatic dynamics, a few of the non-adiabatic dynamics methods in the DFTB plus package. So here is the brief outline of my talk. I will be showing a few applications of the non-adiabatic dynamics as well as the adiabatic dynamics. If time permits, I will also go through the electronics, few examples of the electronic structure methods applications. If not, I'll directly go on to the ongoing works that I'm doing at the IIT Madras, along with the possible areas of collaboration. Moving on to the first application. So here we will be discussing the non-adiabatic molecular dynamics application. So the wave function should be represented in terms of the several potential energy surfaces. So in this particular application, we have studied the electron dynamics. So we captured this electron dynamics by implementing the non-adiabatic dynamics method known as the fewest switches surface hopping method in the DFTB plus package. So here we used the electronic structure method as the DFTB itself. So our Hamiltonian, when we are trying to expand, we are using the DFTB, and we captured this electron dynamics using this non-adiabatic dynamics method known as the fewest switches surface hopping. So here I am showing you in this video the electron dynamics that has been captured using this method. We can clearly see that, So you can clearly see that on the right hand side we have this phthalocyanine molecule, which is like a donor molecule, and on the left hand side we have a fullerene molecule. What we have seen in the video is an ultra fast charge transfer of the electrons from the phthalocyanine moiety, which is the donor moiety, to the acceptor moiety, and we simulated this using this fewest switches surface hopping methodology. So we got motivated by the ongoing debate on the mechanism of exciton dissociation at the donor acceptor interfaces of an organic photovoltaic system. So a typical bulk heterojunction would look like as shown in this figure. Excuse me 1 second. So as shown in this figure, where both the donors as well as the acceptors will be miscible at various proportions. So this is like an atomistic view of such a bulk heterojunction. So the typically accepted mechanism for the exciton dissociation in the organic photovoltaic system is we will be having, once we start shining the light, there will be generation of the excitons either at the donor or at the acceptor phase, and these excitons will be migrating towards the interface where they will be separated into the charge transfer state, and this charge transfer state either can be further, these charges can be further separated in order to form what is known as the charge transfer to charge separated state, or these charges can recombine. However, there is both experimental and theoretical results which are supporting different kinds of mechanisms for this formation of the charge separated state. So some of them include the direct exciton. So this exciton will be directly converted into the charge separated state, or they can form the hot CT states. These are like vibrationally excited states we can see, and from there it can be forming the dissociation state and so on and so forth. So in order to resolve this debate, one needs to have a non-adiabatic dynamics method which can help to exactly pinpoint what is the exact mechanism. So here we try to implement one of that non-adiabatic dynamics methods in the DFTB plus package, and the current work is just the first step towards realizing that goal. So moving on to the methodology. So as mentioned, our aim is to simulate the charge transfer dynamics as such. So in order to do that, first we need to solve the time-dependent Schrodinger equation in order to obtain the time-dependent wave function, which is psi of r comma t. So here we are using this time-dependent electronic Schrodinger equation in order to obtain this psi of r comma t, and we will be numerically integrating this time-dependent Schrodinger equation. So once we have, so although we are saying that psi of r comma t is a wave function, it's much like any vector. This is like an abstract vector in the space. So in order for us to define this vector, we need to have the components as such. So how do we get the components? First, we need to have the basis. And once you have the vector, you project this vector onto the basis in order to get the components. So similarly, here we are using what is known as the Born-Oppenheimer ansatz in order to expand the vector. This is the wave function in terms of the instantaneous eigenstates that we can obtain by solving the time-independent Schrodinger equation. That is the eigenvalue problem h psi is equals to E psi, where you will be just diagonalizing this matrix in order to obtain the eigenvectors. So these eigenvectors, you can assume them as molecular orbitals or S0, S1, and so on states. These are the ones that we will be using in order to expand the complete system's time-dependent wave function. So once you have the wave function, these expansion coefficients, you can visualize them as the components of the vector. These are the ones which are the adiabatic populations, like the state populations are these ones. So once you have these ones, you can project them onto the atomic orbitals in order to obtain what is known as the charge population. So this is the procedure that we have implemented. So first, in order to obtain a differential equation that we can numerically solve, we have projected this phi i's, which are nothing but the molecular orbitals, by expanding this ansatz into this first equation, which will give us roughly this a differential equation. Here, the second term is the most important one, which contains two indices, J and I, which corresponds to the transfer of electrons from one state to the another state. So this is the one which corresponds to the electron transition between the potential energy surfaces, and this is what is generally known as the non-adiabatic coupling. So this is the one which is responsible for the electrons to transfer from one state to the other. And since this is a differential equation, we need to have an initial condition. Here, the initial condition we consider as the LUMO of the donor. So the electron donating molecule's LUMO is considered as the initial wave function, and then we propagated this differential equation using we integrated the differential equation using the fourth order Runge-Kutta method. We are also under the classical path approximation, which essentially means that the back reaction of the electrons will not be there. And as mentioned earlier, these eigenvalues, eigenvectors, etc. were solved using the normal DFTB Hamilton. So coming to the non-adiabatic dynamics method, as mentioned, we have used what is known as the fewest switches surface hopping method. So this is a phenomenological model which assigns a probability known as the Gij, which will be, once we assign this probability, we will be able to compare it with a random number, which essentially says that whether an electron can go from ith state to jth state or not. So if this Gij, this probability is greater than the random number, then we will allow the electron to hop from one surface to the other surface. That is, after you shine the light, you will accept that, okay, this electron transition can happen. If not, you will just continue to stay on the same state. So here rho ii corresponds to those adiabatic populations, and rho ij corresponds to the adiabatic density matrix, and this is the derivative coupling that we have seen earlier. So going on to the results. So using this FSSH methodology and the DFTB Hamiltonian, we have calculated the non-adiabatic transitions. So on the left side of the figure, I have shown how the energy of the system, how the adiabatic energy states change with time. As you can see, there are several places where these adiabatic energies are coming very close to each other. So these are the places where this transition can occur very easily, and where the non-adiabatic coupling vector also will be very high, which means electron can easily jump from one state to this one potential energy surface to the other potential energy surface. This red color curve that you are seeing corresponds to the non-adiabatic transition, that is the transition from one electronic state to the another electronic state for a specific FSSH trajectory. In order to obtain any meaningful answer, we need to run the simulations for several thousands of FSSS trajectory and several nuclear trajectories as well, because this is a stochastic process and we need to average all of this. So that's what we have done in order to obtain what are known as the adiabatic populations or MO populations. So here this LUMO plus 3 corresponds to the LUMO of the donor, that is the phthalocyanine. So here the LUMO electron population is decreasing, which means the donor is donating or losing its electrons, and that's what we were able to capture clearly. And this LUMO corresponds to the Fullerene's LUMO, that is the acceptor is accepting the electrons. So we could clearly capture that dynamics using our methodology. A better way to represent the same answer is through the charge populations, as I mentioned earlier. So here is the charge population plot. You can clearly see that both the H2PC molecules, which are the donor molecule population, is decreasing, whereas the acceptor molecular population is increasing. Qualitatively, our dynamics also is in well agreement with other ab initio methods. They have also shown that within the first 500 femtoseconds, there is a complete charge transfer from the donor to the acceptor. So in order to further verify our implementation and the methodology, we have also studied with both C60 and C70 molecules, where C60 corresponds to a better electron acceptor when compared to the C70. And we accordingly have seen that it has a slower population rise. So the electrons are like going very slowly to the C70 when compared to the C60. And here the experimental results are shown in the black curve, which are also in well agreement with our theory. We have also studied the similar kind of dynamics and other organic photovoltaic systems, such as the C60 CPC triad it is called, where there is fullerene, carotenoid, as well as the porphyrin. And we have also implemented various other short-term propagation techniques, the other non-adiabatic techniques, such as short-term propagation of TDSE, quasi-diabatic PLDM, etc. etc. With that, I will stop the first application of the non-adiabatic dynamics. Now we are moving on to the second kind of applications, which are the adiabatic dynamics applications. Please remember that in this case, the wave function can be represented by a single potential energy surface. So in these applications, we have considered, for example, the understanding of the various kinds of electrolytes that are useful for the calcium ion batteries. So calcium ion batteries are like multivalent ion batteries that have the potential to replace the lithium ion batteries. And due to the very high reducing power of the calcium, currently there is a lot of research going on in order to predict the proper salts and the solvents that can stay as it is on the calcium surface. Because of its high reducing power, majority of the salts and solvents will decompose on this calcium surface. So we have studied 4 of the salts and 3 solvents, and we find that carborane salt that is shown in here, this carborane salt and glyme solvent are 2 of these salt and solvent combinations that can stay undissociated on this calcium surface. So these ab initio molecular dynamic simulations also helped us to understand why these molecules or the salt molecules are completely dissociated. If you are doing a simple electronic structure method, so these molecules will be showing to be very stable. On the other hand, experiments clearly show that they will be dissociated, and that's what is captured when you are using the molecular dynamics simulations. We have explained these results using what is known as the time-dependent projected density of states. So using that, we were able to exactly pinpoint why these molecules are dissociating. So another application of the adiabatic molecular dynamics include the dissociation of these perfluoroalkyl substances. So here we have considered the harmful pollutants. These perfluoroalkyl substances are harmful pollutants that are present in the water and that are present in the drinking water resources all over the world. Already these perfluoroalkyl substances are banned in both USA and various European countries. However, they are not yet banned in India. So as such, studying how to degrade these molecules is very important. So we have considered these perfluoroalkyl substances and we have added the electrons to this system containing perfluoroalkyl substance and the water moiety around surrounding it, like a solvent moiety that is. So, and then when we simulated, we did see that these electrons, additional electrons, can help to degrade this carbon-fluorine bonds. Remember that carbon-fluorine bonds are one of the strongest bonds that can be formed by a carbon atom. And we observed that in these systems, the trans elimination, when you add 2 electrons, two of these carbon fluorine atoms can be broken. And while describing the reaction mechanisms, we did find that the trans elimination is one of the important ways to degrade this system when compared to the opposite cis elimination. Moving on to the other kinds of examples, we have also used this adiabatic molecular dynamics in order to understand the catalysis reactions, such as the formation of ammonia under the plasma atmosphere. So here our experimental collaborators have synthesized, have seen that there is a very weak catalyst dependence when they are using this low temperature plasma in order to form the ammonia. Then what we have done is, like, we considered both the copper as well as the platinum surfaces, and we collided these surfaces with a pre-adsorbed material like either hydrogen or nitrogen. We have first passivated the copper and platinum surfaces, and then we started colliding this system using hydrogen or nitrogen. So what our simulations have suggested is the very weak catalyst dependence is because of the different kinds of mechanisms that have been observed on the copper as well as on the platinum. On the copper, it is the alliradial mechanism, which just means that the incoming nitrogen molecule is able to directly interact with the hydrogen atoms that are present on this copper surface, and it can form the ammonia molecule. Whereas on the case of platinum, the hydrogenated surface, if you are impinging onto the hydrogenated surface, if you are impinging a nitrogen atom, that will be just adsorbed there, as shown here. On the other hand, if you consider the saturation with NH groups, like as I have shown here, then if you start impinging either with hydrogen atom or with a nitrogen atom, we are able to observe the ammonia. So in this way, we can always understand different kinds of processes using the ab initio molecular dynamics, which will be complementing, and in sometimes they are superior even to the electronic structure methods like DFT that we are generally using. So here is another example where we have used the water gas shift reaction, but I'm skipping this part. So moving on to the other electronic structure method applications, we have seen in this particular example, we tried to understand the reaction mechanism of a supramolecular assembly that was synthesized by our experimental collaborators. So this supramolecular assembly resembles or mimics the carbonic anhydrase activity, where carbonic anhydrase is a enzyme that is present in various organisms, including humans, and its main purpose is to convert that CO2 which is there in our blood, and it will convert it into the bicarbonate as well as the protons in the presence of water. So it actually regulates the pH levels in our body, as well as it will help us to just exhale the CO2, and so that it can pump the CO2 from the blood into the lungs. So here,
across 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So this is one of the examples where we have used the electronic structure methods in order to understand the exact reaction mechanism of this assembly in order to exactly reproduce this carbonic anhydrase reaction mechanism, ester hydrolysis mechanism. So I'm skipping 2-3 slides because these are other examples of where we have seen how to unzip the carbon nanotubes and how to understand the layer dependent band structure and various other graphene and similar kind of materials and their optical and electronic properties. So moving on to the ongoing research at the Iatm. So here I have majorly concentrated after coming here 2 particular projects. The first one is on the understanding the solid electrolyte interface that is formed on the calcium surface, and another one is to understand the dissociation of the perfluoroalkyl substances. So in this particular project, what we understood from the very recent experiments that were performed in April or so is, like, whenever the salts containing boron atoms are there, so then this calcium can be reversibly deposited on a calcium anode. This is what we have learned from the experiments. However, simultaneously, the experiments have also shown that if there is a salt like TFSI2 or something, they cannot reversibly deposit. So only boron containing salts can reversibly deposit. Moreover, if we add boron additives, then these salts which can on their own cannot deposit can also be deposited now. So the addition of boron is doing something to this interfaces is what we learned. So in order to understand that, we started simulating with both CaBF, so various kinds of, so CaBF4 twice salt as well as the CaTFSI2 salt. These 2 salts we have considered, and we started understanding the solid electrolyte interface that is formed here. What we understood was, like, the CaTFSI2 salt is automatically dissociating due to the high reducing power of the calcium, whereas CaBF4 is not. In order to further understand this, we tried to fix the CaTFSI2 salt first. So since the experiments have already observed that after a few cycles, if you add the boron additives, CaTFSI2 can be useful. So we fixed the salt and we studied it further. And here also we understood that once you fix the salt first and then release it, then already the Ca layer that can reduce is reducing the solvent and it is leaving the salt as it is. So this is one work which we are continuing in order to further understand the calcium migration. The other one is to find the suitable metals in order to decompose this perfluoroalkyl substances which are harmful pollutants. So we did find that based on our experience with the calcium ion batteries, when we use the calcium metal, it can be easily degrade. We can easily degrade this PFAS material. So this is also an ongoing work. And with that, I'm going to the possible areas of collaboration. So we definitely need help from the experimentalists in order to study the degradation of perfluoroalkyl substances. These will be very important things very soon. And the other place where we are interested in collaboration is with the programmers who can port our NIMD codes onto a GPU or FPGA architectures. Of course, we are happy to collaborate on other areas such as battery technologies, catalysis, etc. I just want to thank all my group members. The calcium ion batteries work is being done by Subdeep Banerjee. He's one student, one of the PhD students. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention.
Fabulous. I mean, Chaitanya, you exposed the right amount of science with the right opening for collaborations, expanding into energy, water, environment, materials, a number of areas. Now, let me ask one or two questions and then keep this open. We have about 7 minutes left for questions. So glad. You talked about electron transfer dynamics, especially when it comes to transfer dynamics with a given molecular orbital, molecular specificity in this. Now, how do I experimentally probe that to a specific molecule? Of course, you could probably think in terms of energy tuning, etc. But you are looking at the overall relaxation dynamics. Experiments see that overall relaxation dynamics. So, what's your thought on that?
So what we are here doing is actually an approximation, because the real system will not be staying in any of these molecular orbitals. Probably, as you pointed out, this will be somewhere like S0, S1, these kind of states. So here what we are seeing is like we are trying to approximate that S1 state as the LUMO of one of these molecules, and then we are trying to see the dynamics. And also we are in a single particle picture, that is like only one electron we are simulating here. So in reality, we need to also include things like electron-hole interaction, and we need to consider all the other electrons as well. But that is a little bit more difficult thing to theoretically capture at this moment. So the
second thing was in the context of the slide number 18 or so, you were talking about changes in the system, in the whatever is the interaction that is happening with collisions or with encounters between two molecular systems. You are probing that non-adiabatically, very, very good. But the system is undergoing changes, such as, for example, a metal involving something. There can be unteller distortions. As these things happen, as these interactions happen, there are changes. Along with those electron dynamics events. Can I see that structurally? Can I correlate these structural changes as well? How do I do that with your codes?
With my code at this moment, we cannot, because I mean, we can at least for as long as on the single potential energy surface we can, but once we are going on beyond one potential energy, that is this non-adiabatic level, we cannot, because I did not include the electronical non-adiabatic influence onto the nucleus. So that part we cannot capture. But as such, with single potential energy, we can definitely understand how these nuclei are moving, or how, for example, as you mentioned, the Untitled distortion or something, that we can definitely correlate.
All right, let me move on to others in case there are questions.
Yeah, this is Kannan here. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Yes, Professor.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Right. Yeah, very nice talk, and definitely it would fit into some of the areas which I'm working on currently. It will nicely complement my ideas. So what I would see is one possible application of your DFT simulations would be photocatalysis, where I think by shining the UV light on the titania catalyst, you can achieve higher degradation of the different dye molecules. So I'm working on wastewater treatment involving textile dyes. So what catalyst to use and what dopants we can further add, what should be the composition of titania, all these things I think I can experiment, but by trial and error. But in order to do it in an informed way, given the thousands of combinations of possible atoms and different transition metals and so on. So I was wondering whether the DFT and the modified versions of DFT will be able to help me make an informed decision so that I can narrow down the number of options to a few, maybe 5 or 6, which I can try and then optimize.
So yeah, definitely. So as long as like we are dealing with the DFT level, then that is possible. At least if you are considering one particular material, for example, TiO2 you mentioned. So with that, if you have several configurations in your mind, so then we can scan them and we can at least do the band alignment and we can see which ones would correspond to the right material for your specific application, which is
but Titania, quite a bit of such work has already happened in terms of what is optimizing, etc. But overall, developing a kind of a combinatorial program as to what is rightful experimental synthesis. This has happened in superconductivity. This has happened in several other areas as well. You are aware of this, and so yeah. But then there is a lot of possibility. Let me take 2 other questions, Kannan. Let me move on because there are other questions as well. Soumya, you have a question, and followed by Sanjeev.
Yeah, thank you. So Chaitanya, it's a very nice talk, and especially I'm quite interested in this organic photovoltaics, which you do on a regular basis. And probably Venkat also will be interested because we are doing in collaboration this work. So I have one small question. Maybe we can discuss further in offline. Very interesting thing. So slide number 16. We're showing some initial condition of that I as 0 equal to LUMO. So why this donor of the LUMO is important? Because it's when it's donating, I suppose it is from the HOMO, right?
Yeah, so but what we are trying to simulate is that after the excitation has happened. So now your electron after excitation is in general should go to the LUMO of the donor molecule. And we are just simulating with the single electron. So now once this electron goes to the LUMO, from there we are trying to see how it is moving down. So this is what we have seen. So here this LUMO plus 3 corresponds to the LUMO of the donor, which is the H2PC in this case. And how that is finally coming to the LUMO is what LUMO here corresponds to fullerene LUMO. How it is transferring is what we are seeing. So we are just considering
it is going through the excitonic states, right? So how you are
we are already
confused here.
So we are assuming that the electron is already excited. So from that,
no, I'm not talking about the excited. I'm talking about exciton.
Yeah, so we are only considering the electron as I was answering to Pradeep. We are only considering electron, but the next level is to also include the electron-hole interaction. So those interactions are absent here at this moment.
Okay, I see.
Thank you. Sanjeev, you have a question.
Thank you.
Look on.
Yeah. Hi, Chaitanya, very nice talk. So my question is, I think one of the enzyme we had talked about the carbonic anhydrase, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
So for enzymatic reactions such as this, so at what level do I describe my protein?
At what level? Sorry, I could not hear you.
I can describe my protein. It's you must be describing in an implicit way, right?
So I'm actually simulating this ZnPA2 assembly. It's not the anhydride. I'm not simulating the enzyme here. I'm just simulating the supramolecular assembly that they have synthesized, which is mimicking the carbonic anhydrase here. So I'm just simulating this part, which contains a zinc atom and the other.
So in any way, do you have a background effect what enzyme might impart on this whole reaction?
As I said, this is, no, I don't have, but as I trying to mention, this is not an enzyme simulation. This is supramolecular assembly that is mimicking the enzyme. Probably I was not
like we do in QMMM, that we basically take the presence of protein in an indirect way. That is not there at the moment in your system, that we can get the implicit presence of the enzyme. Not yet, right?
Not yet, no. Pradeep,
yeah, we should move on. Thank you very much, Chaitanya, for that wonderful talk and taking questions. Let's move to the next talk. Kannan, please make your presentation. I am going to give you again a warning at the 20 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just trying to load the files.
It does come. Go ahead.
Yeah. One more minute. Okay, so I'll get started. Somehow the 1 minute. Maybe one more question can be handled. I'll try to get the particular 1 minute. Sorry about this. I thought I had it open, but
doesn't matter. We can go to the next speaker also. We can come back.
Yeah, that will be great. Matter. Yeah.
Raghu, can we just start it, Raghu?
Sorry?
Can you start?
Yeah, I can start. Sure. You want me to go?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Okay. So shall I share my screen?
Yeah, please do. Again, at 20 minutes, I will give you a warning.
Sure. Let me start. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it has come. Full screen, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So today I will talk about our work in droplet microfluidic design through a dialogue between computations and experiments, which is the theme of these weekly seminar meetings.
Monthly seminar.
Oh, monthly. Sorry. Okay. So quickly, I guess many of us know this, but I just thought I will still put this in. Let me see if I can start my video. Okay. Okay. So of course, I am a theory computation guy, but over a period of time, I've also started doing experiments. And the way I do experiments is if I find something very interesting from the theoretical work that we do, then I look at trying to support that experimentally. So all of you might have heard this very famous saying, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So the view is that we do the models and then we try to understand, get insights from the model, and really looking for a perfect model is a fool's errand. So many of the work that I'm going to show you in the short 25 minutes, we look at simple models that allow us to embed them into a larger optimization framework that will give us lots of interesting ideas. The advantages, of course, of this approach is we can learn a lot with considerably less time, effort, and so on. And of course, the other interesting thing with models is a well-developed model, you can do tons and tons of experiments and kind of prove some things. With experiments, you can see something once, twice, but you have to do multiple times to make sure that what you're seeing is really true and so on. Of course, the disadvantage is really what will happen in reality. If you're just a modeler, you're always left with the doubt of what's going to happen when you actually put these models to use, as people say, when the rubber meets the road. For some reason, it's not moving. Okay, slow. Okay, so with experiments, of course, a few well-designed experiments can unravel critical insights very quickly, and really the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So I can do any modeling and tell you anything I want, but unless I show you something, it's not going to be useful. The difficulties are it's time consuming, it's much more expensive and so on. So in some sense, I think there has to be a nice combination between theory and modeling, not only across faculty, but even within one's own group to kind of understand some of these. Just to quickly give you an idea of the kind of research that we do in my lab, as I said before, I do theory work, mostly in what we call as process systems engineering. And we do modeling of fuel cell systems. We now have a newer architecture for a fuel cell. And today I'm going to actually talk about microfluidics, some of the things that my lab has been doing in the last 10 years. For people who do not know what microfluidics is a science of manipulating very, very small quantities of fluid. And there is a standard microfluidics where you have a continuous phase. Then you have a droplet microfluidics where you have a discrete or a droplet phase, which moves in the continuous phase. And this is going to be the cornerstone for many lab on chip applications. The reason why people are really interested in microfluidics is that you have the ability to precisely control concentration of molecules in space and time. So you can have very, very tight control over what you do. And there have been multiple applications that people have talked about: biological analysis, high throughput screening, protein crystallization, and so on. Now, the way we look at these droplet-based microfluidic networks is that essentially you're going to have a very small amount of fluid in a continuous phase. And you can't, though you want every droplet to have the same experience, you cannot do droplet by droplet. It just does not scale. So one of the ideas is to have these droplets go through a network, and then you have multiple applications that come out of these droplets, basically moving through a network. So when they move through a network, what happens is they interact hydrodynamically, and then you want to take advantage of that hydrodynamic interactions to kind of do multiple things. So here in this talk, what I'm going to show you is what is possible by just taking advantage of this hydrodynamic interactions in terms of certain larger level, system level objectives. And then if you actually use the correct system, the physics, chemistry, and so on, then you can actually get to applications. If you want to do this, then basically what you have to do is you have to understand how these droplets move in these networks. So this is very akin to our cars and scooters going in the road. So it's like traffic. So you see these droplets and they're going into different parts of the networks. So how do they move and so on? So if you want to do that, you have to really understand the decisions that these droplets make. How do you model the hydrodynamics, the fluid dynamics, and so on? And you can basically leverage these to do multiple applications, such as sorting, merging, storing, and so on. So this is the area that I'm actually going to talk about, where we start thinking about how would we model these droplets in these networks. And since this is a very, very short talk, I'm going to show you the rich dynamic behavior in this, really fascinating behavior that these droplets have when they go into these networks, even a very, very simple device, what kind of interesting features you see. And then the idea is also to show you that this rich feature, you can actually calculate and compute using very complicated models, but those are not going to be very useful because you want to use these models in a larger objective of designing this system. So I'm going to show you two very, very simple models and how they capture the underlying complicated behavior of these networks. The first example I'm going to take is what is called a loop device. I'll show you a video of this loop device, and it's a very interesting example. So I call this a 1D channel simply because though it's curved, there's only one direction in which these droplets are moving. So let's look at this very, very simple video. There is a drop that comes to the entrance, and then it looks almost as if it thinks, and this then decides to either go out or go up or down. And then once they go in, they go through the network and it comes out. Now, a simple system like this is called a loop system. shows really fascinating behavior. So for example, if you look at the left-hand side of this picture, which is where you have these droplets coming in. Let me see if we can get the, there's a pointer. Okay, so you see the droplets are coming in at equal intervals. However, look at what happens here. When they go out, they have two frequencies. So this is called two-period behavior that we see with this droplet. Now, if you change the spacing of these droplets coming into this network, you could see, for example, three-period behavior. If you still further change the spacing of this droplet, you can actually see very chaotic behavior. So nothing changes except that the spacing at which these drops come in change, and then this totally changes the dynamic behavior of these systems. So one of the interesting questions is, how do you really model this? Do you need a very complicated model to do this, or you can do this with a very simple model? The very first model, so here we show that it's the same network. There's no difference except that the spacings have changed. And if it were a linear system, if the spacing is changed, you'll get the output at the same frequency. Because it's a very nonlinear system, the spacing leads to multiple nonlinear behavior here. So is there a way to capture this nonlinear behavior? Is an interesting question. 1 second, little slow. Yes. So the first model, just to tell you how, if someone conceptualizes these models in a very nice way, how very simple models can capture such complicated behavior. The first model I'm going to explain, and this is again with the theme of actually connecting the experiments and having seen something quite interesting and rich. How do you capture the dynamics using a very simple model? You write a very simple model, which you say, whenever there is a node, there has to be flow conservation. Okay, so that is one, the first principle, flow is conserved at the node. And then you use a very electrical engineering principle, which is V equal to IR. In these fluidic systems, equivalent to V, you can have delta P. And then you have Q, which is the flow rate, like your I. And then you define a resistance. And the resistance is basically the resistance of the channel. And you basically add a linear additive resistance for every drop that gets into a portion of the channel. And then you basically write this constitutive relationship, which is delta P equal to QR. And then there are two things that are happening here. One is the continuous fluid flowing, and then there's the droplet which is moving. Then you say, let me write an equation for the droplet. I'll say the velocity of the droplet is simply linear function of the velocity of the continuous phase, which can be easily found out by Q by the cross-sectional area. Let's take a very simple model like this. So this was proposed by Schindler and Achari. When I read this paper, it was a really, really powerful model because it's very, very simple. And we are trying to see whether this can capture this complex behavior. And this is actually experimental data from the work that was done in our labs, where you actually have these droplets and you plot these frequencies, and you can see how a very, very simple model and the tunable parameter, this resistance, captures this very interesting behavior where you have this 2-cluster behavior, 3-cluster behavior, chaotic behavior, and so on. So one example here. I'll move on to the next example, but before that, I just want to tell you, very interesting questions are, how does this chaotic behavior occur? So does it occur? Clearly, it does not seem to be occurring through period doubling and so on. So what is the fundamental physics that drives this chaotic behavior? We showed that it is intermittent chaos. And in fact, we were able to show from analytical work with the simple model, what are the transition points where you will get chaotic behavior. So you go from one period to another, when you move on the different inlet spacings, and at certain spacings, you will see that you will get this intermittent chaos and then move on. So this is a very interesting example of how a model captures very, very rich, nice behavior that we would like to capture. Now that was a 2D example. Let me show you another fascinating, sorry, that was a 1D example. Let me show you a fascinating 2D example here. Here, we are looking at a geometry. This is called the Haley-Shaw geometry, where you have an expanding section and you have a contracting section. And then the physical properties are such that you have these drops, they don't coalesce, and you basically, this is actually, I think, PDMS in water. These don't coalesce, and then you send them at certain spacing again. Again, remember, we are going to do the spacing. Let's see what happens. Okay, so at certain spacing, you have a single layer. After a while, at certain other spacing, you have to, this is actual experiment. This is experiment data. And then you have multiple layer formulation. Okay, so now you could ask this question: how would I model this? How would I understand why these layers are formed, and can I capture these layers using a model? It turns out that these layering is happening when there is crowding, and crowding leads to instability. So you have a single layer, and when there is crowding and the spacing is in such a way that the crowding is controlled so that you have only two layers, or if it's a lot more crowding, you can have many more layers and so on. So this is our model that we did in our lab. So basically we said, how do we model this? It's a very complicated fluid dynamics problem. If you have to model every droplet and then you have to model the continuous phase and so on, it's going to be very complicated. So we again did a very, very simple model. We did an agent-based model where we consider each drop as an agent. And the agent, we write the standard force balance equations and F equal ma. And the force, we come up with constitutive relationships for the force. When drops come together closer, they repel each other. And there are different constitutive forces that we write. In a short talk, I don't want to show the math of it, but basically you can imagine that it is a multi-body problem. You have these interaction forces for every one of these drops, and you add them up and then vectorially solve this F equal to ma equation. Very, very similar to this molecular dynamic simulation kind of equations, except that this is for this fluidic system. Now let's see what happens with this. So here, the spacing is matched exactly. On the right-hand side is our simulation. The simulation actually captures very intricate behavior. If you look at the exit of the system, suddenly these drops will be pulled out. And the reason why they are pulled out is because it's a contracting section and the velocity increases suddenly. And our simulation captures this one layer formulation. Here, another simulation which shows that we can capture the two-layer formulation. Again, the point that I'm trying to make is the model is a very, very simple model, which is very tractable, because our interest is in really using these models for answering other questions, which I'll come to in the next few slides. And we can see that you can capture again this three-layer formation. And the insights behind why this layering occurs, where does the instability occur, and so on, are things that that we can explain from this video. And actually, if you look at the exit, you will again see a very intricate pattern where you have the center drop going in, and then the one from the bottom goes out, and the third one from the top goes out. And if you see the simulations, it will capture the same behavior, which is quite an interesting thing for a simple model to capture such intricacies. So you might say, well, you can do all of this, so what? It turns out that there are hundreds of applications for this. I'll show you one fascinating application. This was a paper that was published in Science a while back, where you can see there is this notion of a droplet computer. The first video, if it runs. Okay, so if you see this, the first structure is what they call as flip-flop. Basically, if you think of having a drop in a location as a binary digit 1 and it not being there as 0, you can see that these two top and bottom keeps flip-flopping. So there's 1, 0, 1, 0, and so on. So that is flip-flop an operation. Here, there is another very interesting operation. This is called a ring oscillator. You see a droplet, it goes, and then it goes into that and pushes another one into another portion of the ring. So if you think of, whenever a droplet is there, that portion is 1, it's not there, it's 0, then you can see that it is oscillating 1 and 0. Now, the third example that you're seeing right now, it's a synchronizer. It's a very interesting example where you see two droplets coming in at a distance from each other, but when they go out, they synchronize. Why does this happen? It happens because there is some momentum that is being transferred through that ladder network. So this is one example people talk about where you can actually use these kinds of ideas to build droplet-based computers and so on. Sounds a lot of work needs to be done, but it's very, very exciting. So the question is, there are so many logical operations that we have seen. Can we actually have these droplets do all of these logical operations? Then can we put together, imagine like your microprocessor, a completely fluidic network, which is going to start doing computations. Okay, so that is kind of the holy grail of this. So what we are doing in our lab is we are using these to come up with multiple designs where we can show these kinds of behavior. And there are two main ideas that we're using. In these examples, the reason why I picked these examples was in the 1D example, the design concept is actually spacing. I showed you as the spacing keeps changing, the behavior changes. So inlet spacing itself has a lot of impact in terms of what happens to the behavior of the system. Okay, so that is one design concept. So the question is, if you give me droplets coming in, is there some way in which you can find out the appropriate spacing between these droplets so that at the exit, it will do what you want it to do? So for example, here, if I have a sequence of droplets A and B, which are two different droplets, I want them to come through this network, and then I want them to get sorted. Okay, one droplet goes in sync 1, another droplet goes in sync 2. So what could be an application for this? This could be an application where if you are able to encapsulate cells in certain droplets, and then you want to have a network which basically separates out droplets where cells are there and droplets where cells are not there into two arms, then you can design something like this. Here, you don't do anything, just keep changing the spacing, and experimentally we know how we can dynamically change the spacing and so on. And we also look at using the models that I talked to you about in a larger design concept to say, if you do this spacing, you will get whatever objective that you're looking for. The other design concept that we talked about, if you looked at the bubble computer or droplet computer examples I showed you, you saw some nice intricate networks there, right? The ladder network and so on. So that is another design concept. So if I have a grid, something like this, and then I say if everything is connected to everything, I have a completely connected grid. Now, if I want to do certain objective for this network, is it possible to remove certain arms of this grid so that I come up with a network structure, and the combination of the network structure and the droplet spacing allows me to basically be able to do anything that I want. Okay, so basic idea is, can you use these models in an optimization framework that allows you to design these networks, which can do sorting, which can do sequencing, and a lot more. And I'll describe some more application examples here. So I already told you that you can use this kind of sorting for single cell analysis, or it simply could be that if you have multiple droplets that are being formed, and using some characteristics of the droplet, which could be the resistance or something else, you are able to separate these droplets out into two different arms. Okay, so what you're doing at a macro level, for example, if you're doing distillation and then you're getting one component as a distillate and one component as the bottoms, if you can do that in these kinds of devices, you can think of
we have crossed 21 minutes. Okay,
okay.
4 more minutes.
So this is the last slide, Pradeep. Okay, so you could also use this for sequencing. So for example, if you want to make designer polymers, you want to stack molecules in a particular order, and then whatever order they come in at the outlet, you want to have them go in a particular order, then you can use these kinds of networks for sequencing designs and so on. There are more computational interesting questions such as coding, decoding, where you can use this kind of droplet computations in cryptography, in compression and droplet computer and so on. So all of these are things that I think we can really look at. So in our lab, we are looking at using these models with an optimization framework to show that these are possible. And we have model systems, and we actually make these microfluidic devices to see how these things work in actual practice. As I said, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Okay, so with this, I'll stop, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Very nice. It came out so well that the interface between theory and experiment, and so I'm so glad, and so many open questions. Let me ask one question and then move on. So I see that the obvious interesting thing is in understanding biological flows and blood and all the complications associated with the blood flows. Now the dimensions are a little bit larger in the arteries, etc. But there are, of course, other cases wherein dimensions of this kind are of use. Now, let me ask you, are there some interesting, challenging questions that one can address and solve these by the simulations that you have shown using these model systems?
Yeah, so for example, in fact, it's very nice that you talked about blood. Blood is a fluid which has multiple particles of different sizes and so on, right? So even so, there I can there's work where people have tried to use these ladder networks and send blood flow through, and then see whether you can separate certain parts of the blood, these cells and so on. So there is a possibility, but it becomes a little more complicated because you have to have particles of different sizes and so on that you have to handle. And so those model systems, again, for sure, you can work with some of this. And there are papers which have looked at using these microfluidic networks and sending blood and looking at some of the applications that you talked about. And I just also want to mention the dimensions of these are the microns. So the ones I showed you are 100 micron and so on, but there is also this millifluidics, where you can actually get these networks in the millimeter. It's actually easier. And then there are very interesting open theoretical questions also in terms of how does the hydrodynamics and the flow behavior changes when you go from a macro to milli to micro and so on. So in some sense, you can go to any size and then do some of these studies. How much these models travels from one to another is itself an interesting question, which we are trying to address.
Beautiful. One of the things in chemistry, very exciting these days, is that in droplets, especially in micrometer-sized droplets, very many interesting new chemistry, happens. Molecular science happens, and this molecular science is an internal thing as well as an interfacial thing. So while you look at the macroscopic behavior of the droplet itself is changing in composition, in molecular detail. And that science is an interface between the physics of microfluidics and the chemistry, the molecular bonds, how they can be excited and activated because of that. So this science is something that we do in our laboratory in another domain, but it is really not in the droplet, in the microfluidic. We take these droplets in air and study the droplets in air. Now, similar thing is what is aerosol dynamics, aerosol chemistry, and such things that are happening in the institute itself. So so there is several interfaces in this. I just want you. It is not a question really, but there is internally so many things are happening. And that is where something that Chaitanya talked about, becoming dynamics and all that in those systems, if that can be handled, if something is subjected to pressure, some kind of, these are kind of Laplacian, these forces are very important inside, right? So those are interesting dynamics. I just want to leave it there and then take Soumya's question and take others' questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Professor Veeragu, thank you very much. It's a very nice talk actually, and quite fascinating. And I have a couple of questions. There is a flow, and you have the equal path. It's identical path. So I'm just a little curious, like if you manipulate the other path, some disturbance or maybe the length or something. So how it will be? Maybe it will be even complicated. The frequency you're talking about.
So it's an interesting thing. So for example, the loop I showed you, right? The single loop. So when it comes to the, in fact, in the original science paper, it's a very nice term they use. The droplet they call as a thinking droplet, because it is just the distances are exact, so the forces are exact. So which direction will it go depends on which offers it less resistance. In reality, in experimental systems, because you will always have manufacturing, precision limits, it will always go in one. But in a purely mathematical sense, if you say the lengths are exact, you cannot figure out which direction it will go to. Then you do it as a stochastic thing. But you can actually manipulate the distances, the sizes, and so on. And this framework allows for that. And the key is whatever you predict, how well it happens is something that needs to be checked.
So these thinking droplets, make this particular question to me, thinking droplet. Okay, I mean, some time ago, people talked about thinking steel. So you bring in kind of biological attributes to materials.
Yeah.
So here is there are wonderful experiments people have done. Ants move through whatever confinement, and they take pathways. And ants take these pathways as if, I mean, here you're saying that droplets take these pathways as if the droplets have life, right? So ants are probably reminiscing or having some kind of analogy to droplets. Yeah.
So actually, so it's so there are lots of other philosophical questions here, right? Because how do they organize? So it's inanimate, but there is this notion of intelligence in the organization. So there must be some objective drives this, right? In the Haley-Shaw geometry, what is the objective that makes it organized, right? And so somehow, philosophically, maybe you can start thinking about how you can actually confine, and constraints can start bringing in behavior that looks as if it is intelligent to outside, though the individual agents themselves are not intelligent. So there are lots of other very, very interesting questions that you can actually pose from a multi-agent perspective with this sample platform. I think it's interesting.
So from your point of view, intelligence is actually of the droplets is energy exchange. It's energy.
Correct.
That is making them intelligent.
Correct.
Well, I would leave there. There are, of course, maybe Soumya has something more, and Venkat also has. Hemachandra, I see. So I stop here.
Yeah.
Can I go
so second?
Go ahead.
Can I continue?
Yeah, please. Whoever wants to, Soumya, finish it.
Very, very simple question. See, this second part, what is showed, actually, there is a flow. So there is an inlet and there is outlet, right? And the velocity are different. So it is something interesting because
Soumya, I don't know whether it's my
engineering point of view, it is something very similar to something.
No, I think it's
limited. Yes. Sorry.
So the more people do what is called molecular electronics, they become entangled.
Soumya's connection seems to be a little difficult for me to hear. Soumya.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now yes. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, when this flow is different, now if you keep on running this, whether the inflow also will be affected? Like when you are building layers.
Very good question. So I think it all depends on what you're controlling. You can control the pressure across the channel, or you can control the flow and so on. So those are details. So it depends on what you control. But the most interesting physics happens here because of the diverging converging section. So when the droplets come in, because it diverges, they slow down. But towards the latter part of the thing, they speed up. And that differential leads to all this very interesting physics that you see. But it really depends on how you set up the experiment. Are you going to do constant delta P or keeping the flow constant and so on? So Soumya, if you're interested, we can talk outside again. Please ping me, we can talk.
Yeah. Thank you.
Close it quickly. Hemachandra?
Yeah, I have a very simple fundamental question. So maybe where you have this, 2D droplet formation, where you have an inlet and outlet, and where you have a bilayer formation.
So I'm confused as in the sense, why are the droplets taking that linear straight line path when there's no external pressure on the other side? Because there is no, these droplets do not have any memory, and they could also take the other longer paths. And that will probably prevent the bilayer formation or other things, even if the even if you change the inlet flow speed. So I'm a little confused as why are they not taking other available paths? Maybe it's a very fundamental question.
No. Actually, it's a very good question. And so when we actually do our phenomenological models, we actually have something called okay. So this is a long. Maybe we should talk outside Hemachandra, because there is a very interesting thing here, because we actually include this is seen in experiments. Okay, so this is not just simulation.
Yeah, that is what was more interesting. Like experimentally, why simulations? I
know. So we can. It will take me some time to explain this to you. I'll explain this. But most important thing is, when we want to do the model to match the system, we are forced to include something called a restitution force, which is whenever it gets offset from the center, there is a force that brings it back to the center. If we remove that force, we can never match experimental data. Okay, so it's a very interesting phenomenon, and again, please, we will.
I do have more questions. I'll probably, I'll leave the time for others. Yeah, I do have.
Mostly people ask me now what funding is there, because of
we are already
very happy to do this.
Yeah.
More technical thing.
Venkat, close this in 30 seconds, Venkat. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Thank you. A beautiful presentation, Professor Rangaswamy. So a quick question is that usually we see water droplets when they move through the channel, they combine. And I see here droplets, they don't combine together. And what is the mechanism? Why should they be isolated?
So this is actually the chemistry of the droplets. So the one example where they are not combining, right?
Yeah.
That is actually PDMS in water. Okay, and so there are other experiments I didn't have the time to show, where there will be coalescence, and then you can actually see avalanche of coalescence and so on. So you tweak those by the chemistry of the molecules. That's the answer.
Okay, and another important point is what Professor Pradeep mentioned is very, very important. In terms of molecular reactions in a droplet scale, I think it would be very exciting to do. Exactly. Yeah. And mass spectrometry is one of the equipments that deals with it a lot, actually. So thank you for the fascinating answer.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. So let us move on. Thank you, Raghu. Let us move to Kannan. Kannan, please. I hope it is ready for you.
Yeah. Let me share the screen, and this time I'm ready. So am I visible? And I mean, is my PowerPoint presentation visible and I'm audible?
Not yet. You're audible. Presentation has not come.
Okay, I'll just share it.
I'll give you the same warning, 20 minutes.
Right. What about now? Is it okay?
It has come. Thank you.
Yeah. First, I would like to thank Professor Pradeep for giving this opportunity to present the interface between experiment and theory, and this would be more of experimental and some modeling and simulation. So it's a very nice opportunity, and I'm really impressed to see the quality and also quantity of work which has been carried out. So yeah, so I'll just give a brief introduction about myself, and this would be followed by a successful experimental theoretical collaboration which happened a few years ago, and what my current activities are and what my requirements for collaboration would be in the present and near future. So I did my MTech at IIT Madras, and I was exposed to solvent extraction, a very fascinating field. And then I continued in the same area in my in McMaster University, Canada. I worked in reciprocating plate extraction column. There I, until my master's, I was pretty much simulation oriented person, but when I went for my PhD, I started doing experiments for the first time. I gradually became better in doing experimental work, and what fascinated me during my experimental program was the direction of mass transfer plays a very important role in the bubble size or particle drop size distribution. If the mass transfer is taking place from water to oil, then the drops were much smaller, and when the mass transfer was taking place from drops to water, the drops became very large. So we found reasons for it and the interfacial tension gradients, and it was really exciting work. And then I came back to India and worked in Larsen and Toubro for a brief period, then moved to IIT Kanpur, where incidentally I met Professor Raghu also. And then I came to IIT Madras. I've been teaching heat and mass transfer process simulation involving both theory and labs. And then I also teach this design of experiments course, which is taken by students across the institute. Both science and engineering department students take this course. And currently I'm working in adsorption. I also teach electives in that area, and catalysis I take classes. I have not really moved into the chemistry of catalysis in a very intense manner, but I hope through proper collaborations I would be able to do so. So first, let me talk about a very successful collaboration between civil engineering departments, mechanical engineering department, and chemical engineering department. We all brought a different set of skills, and they combined in a very nice manner, and we were able to address a very important environmental issue. So I'll explain about that. So we developed a solar wind aided evaporator, and we called it as SWAN-E, solar wind aided natural evaporation. You can see that the drops are getting evaporated by the sun, and we try to get eventually a concentrated water stream. We want to reduce the volume of the concentrated solution. The idea was, if it is possible, to crystallize the salts which are present in the concentrated stream, and thereby remediate and reduce the volume of waste. So this work was pretty much highly publicized, and it came in the newspapers also at IIT Madras, suggesting a natural evaporator. And let me get into the details. So what motivated us? Tirupur is an industrial hub where a lot of activities are going on the textile related products production and distribution. You can see a lot of beautiful products are getting produced with striking colors. And one important thing is a large number of people are employed, and their livelihood are at stake and closely tied up with the industry, textile industry. So there has been robust growth in the exports from Tirupur. I'm talking about the 2017 time frame, 4 years back. And as many as 400,000 workers are directly employed. But even though the color of the garment is very attractive, not so attractive is the effluents which are created. And you can see that the water has taken an ungainly hue, and the aesthetics is completely lost, and the water is not at all useful for irrigation and agricultural purposes. And I'll skip a few slides because of time factor. The main thing is the government asked the industrial units to treat the effluents either through the effluent treatment plants, the common effluent treatment plants, or face closure. And the zero liquid discharge policy was stipulated. And the dyeing and processing units must be located at least a kilometer away from any of the water sources. And units not complying were closed down, thereby leading to a lot of unemployment in the locality. So the main problem here was the conventional treatments were not effective in producing the water of the required quality. And the main challenge was the high TDS which was present, and the pre-treatment methods were not able to reduce it significantly. So the main idea was to tackle the high TDS problem. The solution suggested was mechanical vapor recompression evaporators, and in order to get the zero liquid discharge, but there were a lot of problems with the evaporators because of the elevation of boiling point due to the high salt content, and the driving force, the temperature driving force reduced. And this also led to lower TDS in the concentrate and higher loads on the evaporators and crystallizer. And so the evaporators and the encountered a lot of difficulties. So there were also polymeric heat exchangers were choked by scale formation. The multiple effect evaporators could not handle additional loads, and also a large number of multiple effect evaporators were required, thereby leading to exorbitant increase in investment and operating costs. Solar evaporators were tried but were not successful. Crude evaporators were also tried, but scale formation hindered their performance. And large quantities of firewood had to be used, leading to loss of natural vegetation and frequent shutdowns due to maintenance issues. We were also told by the local people there that there were a lot of evaporators which were installed, but none of them were really operated because of they required large quantities of firewood just for meeting the pollution control norms or obeying the pollution control board stipulations. These were just employed and installed, but really were not used. So there was a need for an alternative method to handle the high TDS in the water. And one idea which we got was from the wind-aided intensified evaporation by Gilron et al. They used fabrics in order to evaporate the concentrated TDS solution. But this fabric, when used in isolation, had a very good performance. But when arrays of fabrics were used, the overall efficiency declined. So this is the wind-aided intensified process. You can see the fabrics which are hung up, and the water is pumped over these fabrics, and the evaporation is realized, and the waste is further concentrated into a small volume. So there was an entrepreneur in Tirupur who invited us to visit his plant, and he had installed a small scale wind-aided evaporator, and he had put natural vegetation and he pumped the concentrated effluent to the top of this evaporator, and this was used to evaporate the liquid and highly concentrate the waste. And why this method can work in Tirupur is it is abundant in solar and wind energy. So we got this idea, and we developed it further, and we got funding from Department of Environment, Government of Tamil Nadu, and through the Environmental Protection and Clean Energy Fund. So the mandate was to develop and standardize cost-effective natural evaporators, and develop sustainable and environmentally clean practice using clean energy to solve the pollution caused by textile industries in Tamil Nadu. So what we did was we started to develop a proof of concept prototype in our IIT Madras campus, and we studied the important variables and developed a mathematical model. And after that, we wanted to implement it in the field. So what we did was the civil engineering collaborators designed this entire unit. They created the volume of the sump, and then they distributed the water by pumping it from the bottom towards the top. And it goes through the steel cage, which is having a packing media. and evaporation takes place. The packing media increases the surface contact between the water and the packing, so that it improves the residence time, and surface area for mass transfer increases, and so there is more evaporation. And then the water gets recycled. So this is a preliminary concept, and then we found that when the water is heated to a higher temperature, the evaporation is going to be higher because the vapor pressure is going to increase. And so we, Professor Srinivas Reddy from Mechanical Engineering Department created this solar collector field, and there was a bank of solar evaporators, and which circulated the water through a storage tank, and hot water was distributed over the evaporator, as you can see here. So we work with a variety of packing material. The chemical engineering background really helped to identify suitable packing material. We tried PVC material, which was spiral shaped. And sometimes these materials cannot be afforded by the local entrepreneurs working in Tirupur. So we took even natural vegetation, which was available in the Tirupur area. We also had other types of rings. So this is the setup in which the rings were packed. This is the arranged Lessig ring. And this is the overall view of the setup. You can see the solar panels in the foreground, and these are the water storage units. We also had multiple evaporators where we could have more than one cage where the evaporation can be enabled. We also put natural vegetation in the evaporator, and so that it can become a cost-effective operation. So in the field conditions, there were a lot of challenges because the air flow rate was changing, and the wet bulb and dry bulb temperatures were also not constant. So this has to be accounted for, and we have to find the performance characteristic of the natural evaporator, and that we called as the number of transfer units. And higher the number of transfer units, better is the performance of the evaporator under the field conditions. So I developed the mathematical model for this because we cannot be doing experiments for a whole variety of scenarios. And the mathematical model will also be helpful to identify the requirements for a given load from the industry. So this is a very simple mathematical model where there is a cross-flow arrangement. The water stream is distributed at the top of the packing material, and air is flowing in a cross-current fashion. Incidentally, after doing this work, where this is a cross-flow evaporation process, I was invited by Vizag Steel Plant for testing their cooling towers. So the cooling towers also operate on the similar principle, and I was able to do the performance guarantee testing studies in their industrial size cooling towers, and the mathematical model which I had developed for this application worked really well. And I was really impressed to see mathematical modeling really proving its worth even in industrial scale equipment. So the model equations were taken from the sources which are given in the slide. So this is the schematic of the mathematical model where air is flowing in a direction perpendicular to the liquid. So we developed the, I will not give too much information here. We developed the material balance and energy balance equations. So I'll just summarize them. Yeah. So let me skip some of the details. That's not relevant at this point. So these are the material and energy balance equations, and this is the flow rate of air, this is the humidity of the air, and this is the enthalpy of the air, and this is the water temperature at any location within the tower. So we developed these mathematical equations. It's a two-dimensional problem. We assumed a pseudo steady state condition so that you don't find time coming into the picture. And we made sure that the physical properties are calculated accurately. The we may be using the best mathematical model, but if the physical properties and the physicochemical properties are not calculated or predicted accurately, the model will not really give good predictions. So I'll just skip the solution methodology here. So what we did was we used the number of transfer units as the adjustable parameter, and we took the field data, and we found by adjusting the number of transfer units what gave the closest match with the field data. Fortunately, in this case, there is only one adjustable parameter to the model, and by adjusting that, we could get the performance of the evaporator. As I said earlier, higher the number of transfer units, better is the performance of the tower. So there are two problems. One, NTU is known. It's a rating problem. And when NTU is unknown, it's a design problem. So in the first case, if you're given a natural evaporator, what would be its performance? And if you're given a particular target, what should be the size of the natural evaporator? So these are the two problems which could be both handled by the mathematical model. So before we use our mathematical model for our field applications, we wanted to make sure that the model is working correct and it is validated. So we took two different case studies from the literature, and in the first case study, the results were pretty close. And then we took another case study, an independent case study from the literature. Again, we found that there was a very good match between the simulation results and the published results in the literature, especially the NTU was pretty close for a similar cooling tower problem. Okay, so it's very important to validate the mathematical model so that the numerical simulation methodology is free from errors. So we ensured that, and then we worked on it, and two publications came in the desalination journal. And so we found a lot of interesting results. I'll skip a few slides here. So you can see that we operated the natural evaporator over the entire day. And you can see that, for example, the relative humidity of the air is changing over a period of time. And you can also see that the evaporation rates is predicted by the green line. This is without solar heating. And when we had no solar heating, we had a value of about 80 kilograms per hour maximum evaporation rate. But when we augmented the process by raising the temperature of water with solar heating, we found that the evaporation rate went to about 140 kg per hour during around midday. That would be expected because the temperature is the highest in the afternoon. And you can see that these are the experimental data. And for example, the exit air temperature, the exit water temperature, all these things were predicted and also measured, and there is a good match between the experimental data and the model predictions. And this is one of the best scenarios where we are using synthetic packing media. But when you use brushwood sticks, local vegetation as the packing media, you find that the evaporation rate, even with solar heating, drops from about 140 to 100 kg per hour.
Yeah, so first 21 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll be quickly winding up. So these are further results, and I also did a simulation to find out the extent of utilization of the natural evaporator. And I found that there is tremendous scope for improvement in the natural evaporator because, as you can see, only the top portion of the evaporator is effectively utilized, and there are a lot of unutilized portions at the bottom. So through process improvements, it should be possible to improve the performance of the natural evaporator even further. And so I think I'll skip a few technical things. And we also looked at the actual field situation, depending upon the water flow rate of 400 liters per hour and different conditions prevailing in the different geographical locations, what would be the number of evaporators that would be required. So we found that when you have very favorable conditions of low inlet relative humidity and the wind velocity is quite high and the water inlet temperature is quite high, 60 degrees centigrade, you find that the number of evaporators required would be very small. Okay, so all these things, the mathematical model helped us to calculate the requirements of the number of evaporators for a field condition. And then we also compared our results with published literature. We found reasonable values. And then what we did was we implemented this technology in the field. The National Institute of Fashion Technology and the Tirupur Exporters Association took up this idea, and they installed a working unit in their site, and they found substantial evaporation of the water could be achieved. So this is the evaporator after it has been used for quite some time. You can see that a lot of salts have been deposited on the brushwood sticks, and they have to be cleaned before the thing can be again reused. So this again came in the newspaper. So the new evaporator is a successful idea, and it found approval, and it also came, and it was highly satisfying. So this completes my very pleasant experience in collaborating with the other faculty in IIT Madras, and each one of us had a very clear idea on what we needed, and we complemented perfectly well. So just coming to the next part of my work. So I think because of shortage of time, I will just explain very briefly what we are doing. We are looking for novel and efficient methods for optimizing multi-component adsorption processes. We have developed using soft computing methods. We have developed an elephant herd optimization algorithm, which is initial guess free, and a lot of people have started using this algorithm, and they have found good results with this. So that validates our methodology. We are developing an elliptical method for multi-objective optimization, where we get Pareto fronts, where you have to go for a compromise solution rather than an utopian solution. And we are also developing, we have also developed a ridge analysis method, where we handle both mixtures as well as process variables in our optimization exercise, and we have applied for a patent. I recently stumbled in the exciting area of industrial fluidized catalytic cracking. I thought it was a saturated field, but I was pleasantly surprised to see how much work is still possible in this excellent area, and we have recently published a paper in this topic. And we are also on the experimental front. We are developing efficient materials for optimal industrial wastewater treatment. We are synthesizing waterproof metal organic frameworks for treating metal ions and mixtures of metal ions. We are also working on eco-friendly clay adsorbents for removal of dyes and metal ions. I am collaborating with the Institute of Plasma Research, where we do the development of zeolite catalysts for adsorbing the isotopes of hydrogen. We have recently taken up thorn bush, which was growing wildly in the outskirts in the suburban areas of Chennai. We have converted it into an activated carbon, and we found that we are able to compare it a very low cost material to what is commercially available at very high cost. Further studies are going on. We are having an industrial project where we develop water stable and attrition resistant adsorbent pellets. The industry people are very happy about the quality of the raw material, quality of the pellets which they have got, and they are coming to us for further collaboration. And we also had a social responsibility project where we actually took the textile and leather dye tannery effluents and came with the overall holistic treatment for meeting the environmental pollution control discharge norms. So currently I'm collaborating with Professor Indumari Nambi in Civil Engineering Department, and as I said, with the people in Plasma Research Gandhinagar and a few other collaboration. I'm open for further collaboration. I would like to collaborate with people who are working in DFT and molecular dynamic modeling and simulation. because we want to improve the performance of our adsorbents, and we would like to do it in a very intelligent and informed manner rather than doing it by trial and error. So that is one area. I'm also looking for extensive physicochemical characterization and identifying reaction intermediates in advanced oxidation processes. So we'll be looking at some of these instruments. I'm already using some of these, but I would like to have more increased access to temperature, TPD, ICP, OES, XPS, and all these other instruments, LCMS. And whenever we do optimization, we need robust models. Sometimes the conventional response surface methodology models are not very robust. They don't have significant lack of it, and they don't have good model prediction, which is very important. And so we are looking for data science concepts which we can develop better models so that they can be used for optimization. So I think in the future I would like to work in membranes, and again similar kind of expertise and collaboration would be required. So that concludes my talk, and I thank you for your attention.
Very nice. You presented it, extremely socially relevant issues, and very nice, very nice. Now, to conclude this particular, aspects of this research, I would like to ask you, what is the current status of that implementation? One. Second is, what is the cost of wastewater and wastewater processing in this method?
Yeah, so actually what happened was we developed this thing, and then we tried to license this technology to the several industry people, and there were a lot of interests from Gujarat, which also had similar issues, and we really tried to take it forward. But after some time, each of us got into different areas and got into other commitments, and so we could not really take it up further. So, but the industrial proof of concept was established, and NIFT actually demonstrated it. We did not go for really cost estimation. We did not do a techno-economic analysis. So, but when you use the abundant solar energy, the solar panels would be the most cost consuming item. Other than that, you get free air and highly windy conditions in Tirupur, and most of the year the humidity is quite small, so the number of evaporator units required would be small, and the evaporators work pretty well with the even natural vegetation. And if they become saturated with salt deposits, they can be simply removed and replaced with some more of the natural vegetation. So even though we didn't do a cost-effective analysis, we found that it would be competitive with the other technologies.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's take other questions. Sri Krishnarka, you can unmute and ask your question.
Yes, sir. Sir, I was wondering, could you comment on the packing density of the materials? Like, does packing density influence the rate of condensation and the interaction between air and water?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we always have the packing material. Let me just go to that. See, let me try to get some pictures. I don't know where it is. Just a minute. Yeah. So when you have packing in a cage, there are a lot of factors involved. For example, you would like to have a bigger piece of packing material or a smaller one. If you go for a smaller packing material, the interfacial area for contact between the air and water would be higher. But when you go for a smaller material, you have to put, in order to fill the cage, you have to put more material, and that is going to increase the cost. On the other hand, further, you'll also have higher pressure drop when you're sending air. In this case, it's not a problem. But if there is too much pressure drop in the cage, then the air intensity would not be as high as it is in the front of the cage. As the air penetrates into the cage, the pressure drop will decrease and the pressure drop will increase and the effectiveness would be reduced. So it's going to be a trade-off between cost and performance. And that's the reason why when you put these packing arranged in a very structured manner, you get very good performance because the packings are smaller. On the other hand, if you put these natural vegetation, this is not as effective as the packing, but this is a low cost option. Again, so there is going to be a trade-off between cost and performance.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Dr. Kannan. It was very nice, and obviously that's the way forward. And you also not only talked about possibility of collaboration, you showed what collaborations can do on a socially relevant problem. Very nice. So let us move to the next talk. That is by Satesh Kumar Yadav. Can you share your screen?
Yes, Professor.
And I would give the same thing 20 minutes later. I will warn you. Thank you.
Right. Is this visible?
Yeah, it is visible, not full screen though.
Okay. Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Professor Pradeep, for organizing these sessions. They have been really enlightening for me. I would present the work I have been doing, mostly on modeling, although I started doing some experiment, which I realized, sorry? Okay. Which I realized probably not many would be interested to take up, which is using a magnetron sputtering machine. That is not part of the presentation today because we do not have anything interesting to talk about. Today I'll be mostly focusing on first principles atomistic modeling of materials.
There are a number of sputtering people in the institute you might be aware of. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I did realize that, but only thing was I was of the opinion that maybe not many people would be interested to take up what I really wanted. And since I had the funding opportunity from institute, so I went that way. Right. But right, I mean, that is not really part of the proposal I had from the modeling, which actually I am trying out experimentally. Was not something part of the presentation, but right, that I can talk some other time. But this would be mostly on atomistic modeling. I call it first principles because it is with the minimum number of approximations. Of course, what Chaitanya presented is, of course, along the line, but mine is mostly based on ground state calculations, not really excited state, which is where Chaitanya's work can complement. And we are working together through a center on atomistic modeling. And I also have course on this first principles, which is mostly based on density functional theory, called atomistic modeling of materials, that MM5003, which I teach in odd semesters. So the overall mission for the group has been to assist experiments or make predictions which otherwise would not have been possible using any other modeling or experimental technique. So I've tried to take you in some of the examples where we have been successful in showing that this can provide, if not quantitative, at least a qualitative intuition, which would not have been possible otherwise. This is the work on sodium-ion cell or battery, which is in collaboration with ARCI. I have an external student who is doing his GRF in ARCI, and he does PhD. He registered as PhD in IIT Madras. So he came up with a very unique problem to me. Of course, with these experiments, he keeps telling that this is what we are doing. And he comes and tells me that if you charge and discharge a battery made of Na3 V2PO4 thrice. So if you see here, these particles, blue ones, they are some 500 nanometer particles of Na3. This is the active material in cathode. It is surrounded by amorphous or mesoporous carbon. Of course, they are very well dispersed. And say I have to give them a lot of credit that they use something called microwave assisted solder technique to be able to achieve this very uniform distribution, as well as the fact that they can scale this process. So it's not really just a demonstration, but they can synthesize it to a very large scale so that they can actually get products. So what happens is that when they charge and discharge in this voltage range, 2.3 and 3.9, which is the black line, you see a very stable specific capacity. But when they charge and discharge at 1.69 to 3.9, their capacity fades, which is what everybody would expect. That as you increase the cycling window and you insert more sodium ions, that is going from 1.87 to 2.33, your capacity would fade. That is a well-established thing in metal ion batteries, both lithium and sodium. But when he further increased the window, going from 1.2 to 3.9, right, these blue ones, again the capacity degradation reduced. So if you see here, it reduces dramatically. But when you start inserting and taking out almost 3 ions, then all of a sudden capacity degradation is not that fast. This is at something called 0.1C. Take it as if this is slow charge and discharge. The graph on the left. While on the graph on the right, if you see, just pay attention to this grayish line. This is at 1C, so 10 times faster. And of course, in battery, you want to charge and discharge faster. So if they discharge it at much faster rate, that is at 1C, the degradation was even dramatic. So it's almost at, when they cycle from 1.6 to 3.9, it degrades completely at some 150 or so cycles. But that was, if they cycled at an even larger voltage window, that is 1.2 to 3.9, on counterintuitive part, it did not degrade actually, but it remained almost stable. So this is a very unique case that why such thing is happening. I mean, this is very counterintuitive to an extent that paper was rejected based on the fact that you guys do not know how to do experiments. You are coming up with a proposal that you cycle at larger cyclic window and you get better stability. So then we dig deeper and try to understand why this is happening. We realize that everything remains the same. The electrolyte, the cathode material, and everything is the same. Then why this could be happening? So based on the intuition that came to us, probably we thought that there is something wrong, or when you charge it to a point where there are, let's say, 3.5 sodium in the material, that is Na3.5. Up to Na3, it is fine. Na3, when you charge and discharge, that is adding almost 2 sodium ions, because the initial material itself is Na3. So there is no expansion associated with cathode materials. Everything remains fine. But if you discharge it further and it gets to Na3, then maybe that Na3.5 is metastable, and that's why it is degrading faster, but maybe Na4 is stable. Although this defies the whole logic that even if you go to Na4, it has to go through Na3.5, but nevertheless, we gave it a try and calculated its formation energy that is presented through this Hull plot. If not everything makes sense here, but what you can see is that the lower the formation energy, more thermodynamically stable this is. So Na3 is of course thermodynamically most stable, and that's why actually it forms when they synthesize these material. Na3.5 is again less stable than Na3, but if it falls on this so-called Hull plot, then it means that it is not metastable, at least it is stable, and so is Na4. Of course, thermodynamically, they are both very unstable, and actually, if you expose it to atmosphere, they would just fall apart. And that is the challenge, actually measuring them. So you cannot even take it out and see what is really happening inside this cathode material once you have charged and discharged between 1.6 to 3.9 or 1.2 to 3.9. So we started calculating, maybe it has something to do with the kinetics, not really thermodynamics. So this is where we found the explanation, which was that when you are charging and discharging only up to Na3, because the diffusivity of sodium in when till up till form Na3 is pretty high, so it can easily charge and discharge in the particles of 500 nanometer. But as soon as you drop it to 1.6, which is sufficient to make Na4 VP, and because already there are sodium ions, so now inserting further one, there is a lot of resistance. So the barrier associated with movement of sodium has increased dramatically. So in a given time, that is at a 0.1 C charge, it can hardly penetrate to a certain extent, and then it starts to create actually a different interface where there is a large difference in lattice parameter of Na3 and Na4. And that is what we thought is responsible for degradation. And of course, if you take it to 1 C now, which is much higher charging, it does not get even enough time to penetrate to that extent. It probably is really just a ring of Na4 that forms, and degradation is even worse. But as soon as you drop it to 1.2, now although it has to just form Na4, but there is enough driving force for sodium ions to get inserted. Because the driving force for movement of sodium well within the material system itself increases dramatically. That's why it is much easier for it to make a more uniform Na4 instead of forming this core shell type structure. That is at 0.1 C. Now, of course, if you take it even higher charging rate, which is 1 C, it would not get enough opportunity to make a uniform Na4. So again, there would be some sort of a core shell type structure with lower stability at up to larger cyclic for larger number of cycles. But it would still be much better than when you are cycling at 1.6. So this combined effect of kinetics and the driving force for diffusion of sodium controls this overall behavior. So we propose that now it's not just necessary that you, in order to find an optimum capacity, the cyclic voltage is also important if you have optimized all other parameters. So they have already done a very good job of creating a very uniform 500 nanometer particles. So now this is yet another parameter that can be controlled to get maximum capacity as well as capacity retention. So this you cannot really have obtained from any other experimental technique, simply because even if you try doing TEM and actually try improving it, you just can't take out Na4 VP in atmosphere. It would just fall apart. So that becomes almost impossible to characterize them. And by the way, so I would keep talking, maybe time would be over. So if you have any question, please feel free to interrupt me and ask. So next one is this 3D metal ceramic interfaces.
So in that context of the sodium vanadate system, you have carbon, and is it possible that at some point in time of that Na3 to Na3.5, you can actually intercalate the carbon on the surface, I mean near the particles of sodium vanadate?
intercalate carbon into the particle.
Intercalate sodium into the carbon.
Yes, so essentially sodium is actually coming through this mesoporous carbon into these active particles. So there would be sodium somewhere in this mesoporous carbon, definitely. And that's the channel through which sodium gets to reach even Na3.
So I'm saying that if you explore the carbon in greater detail, do you see any change in the carbon structure? Any kind of intercalation in carbon, like potassium, you know, you go potassium into the carbon or lithium into carbon. Similarly, is there something possible? That's what I was asking. I'm not really going through to sodium vanadate, but actually getting stuck there as a new phase of carbon near. I'm talking about the not the bulk carbon. I'm talking about the carbon near the particle.
Okay. So this mesoporous carbon near the particle itself changes its phase and that somehow resists. Somehow degrades it. Yeah, that's what the proposal.
Overall, the electrode chemistry is influenced by that intercalated carbon also. Not necessarily, carbon is not only matrix. Is that possible? Is the question.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, the reason we did not even thought of it or we not analyze any detail, because we assume that carbon is just a channel, and really the intercalation voltage associated with the carbon, sodium in carbon is not that significant or high compared to at least Na3. So that may not affect anything. And moreover, if it has to happen, then it would also happen at 1.2 instead of 1.6.
Okay, all right, yeah, thank you.
This one is another very counterintuitive proposal we have. Although there is some evidences, but again, evidences are really indirect, and there are a lot of challenges in experimentally proving these as well. So if you see any way out, I mean, we are also trying through few methods, but if you see a more direct one, we would really appreciate. So this is to do with something called 3D metal ceramic interfaces. So interfaces, as we defined, is two-dimensional. Although you would see it in some cases where there is a mixing possible across the interface, and there are cases, especially if the system are miscible into each other, metals are there, even some ceramic system where cations can exchange, that possibility is there. But I'm talking about metal ceramic interfaces. So if I were to tell you that I deposited, or in a most straightforward comparison, if you had a titanium nitride and you stick a titanium right beside it, and you form an interface, you form a heterostructure. Now, titanium nitride being a stable compound and titanium being a metal, would you think that there is there would be a sharp interface, or there is something else going to happen? And well, there is only limited thing that can happen between titanium nitride and titanium is by mixing of nitrogen across the interface. So one would safely assume, and talking to a lot of people who are actually doing experiments on titanium nitride, it being a very popular heterostructure, simply because titanium is a biological implant. It is used in aircrafts and other places, and titanium nitride being a coating to prevent erosion of titanium. Wherever there is wear and tear, they try to coat it with titanium nitride. So this is very popular one. And anyone you talk to, of course, start with an assumption that this would be a perfectly flat interface and there would not be any mixing. To our surprise, what we find is that using these density functional theory calculations and trying to understand the thermodynamics associated with metal ceramic interfaces, we find that it is somehow thermodynamically favorable for nitrogen to form a vacancy. So there can be a formation of nitrogen vacancy in titanium nitride, and the same nitrogen can migrate into titanium to form nitrogen interstitial. So now if this keeps happening, for nitrogen is flowing from titanium nitride to titanium, they might end up forming this something called diffused interfaces, right? Where, of course, towards the very bulk you see titanium nitride, but as you get closer to titanium, the nitrogen concentration would start to decrease, and then of course you cross to titanium side and you form, and there would be pure titanium. So instead of being a flat one, now your interface actually prefers to be 3D. Only argument I can tell you right now would be by telling you that the sum associated, so vacancy formation energy in titanium nitride is of course positive. You are creating a vacancy. And nitrogen interstitial formation energy, so here is those numbers plotted here. So just pay attention to this very left end of this plot. So titanium nitride vacancy formation energy is positive, and nitrogen interstitial formation energy is negative. That's the case. If you have doubt about that, I cannot really defend right away, but that's the case. And if you take the sum of it, that number is negative. So it means that it is favorable, thermodynamically favorable for nitrogen to form a vacancy in titanium nitride and go into titanium to form a nitrogen interstitial. And that keeps going on till, of course, it does not go indefinitely, but it would go for certain concentration of nitrogen. We approximate it to be 35 or so %, and it would form a chemically graded interfaces. So
21 minutes, okay?
Yeah. Oh, already. Okay. So sure, sir. So I can stop here if you want, or if
you have 4 more minutes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So right. So that was one proposal on that some of the combination of nitride and metal can form a 3D interfaces instead of 2D. So by simple diffusion of species from cation or anion from ceramic side to metal side. But not go into any further detail. If you have question, let me know. This one I wanted to talk about because it might be exciting for a lot of people who are in chemical engineering and chemistry. And this is a little of in terms of so this area is itself being explored extensively, something called single atom catalyst. The proposal is a bit on a side of doping it through ion beam implantation. So this is where it gets little interesting as well as complicated. The idea is that we propose through a series of calculations and publications as well already that if you dope transition metals, implant rather transition metals into a stable oxide. So far people have been trying to stabilize these single atom catalyst on a stable oxide, and that makes a lot of sense because they can act as the base support. What we are finding is that, of course, and people have already struggled to stabilize these single atom catalysts, gold, platinum, because they tend to segregate together and form bigger particles, bigger clusters. So one way we are proposing that could be avoided is by implanting transition metals which has higher affinity for oxygen. One of the cases we showed is niobium. That if you implant niobium into barium oxide, then that can act as a support for single atom. So just would give this example. So if you had a pure barium oxide and So the energy associated with absorbing two gold atom far apart is relatively higher than if they were together. So if we assume that this is our reference where two gold atoms are together, if you try to separate them out, then you have to pay penalty, that 1.3. On the other hand, if I have already doped with niobium, to keep them apart, if that's the reference, actually putting them together itself cost energy, well, not that high, but still you can see that they really, now you have successfully made a way for them to be separated out rather than being together. So by doping by doping stable oxide like barium oxide, where these implanted ions, we show that they could be stable in the interstitial side. That's another interesting thing that came out of these calculations, that they would not substitute, but because barium oxide has such a huge space available in it, that they can be stable at the interstitial site. Now they can start to donate electrons to these single atoms like gold, and they can stay separated. So now you can not only, and it also binds very well. So this number shows like 3.83 compared to 1.88. So not only they stay separated, they bind also very well. So both of the challenges are addressed. Of course, this is purely theoretical. We have no clue if it would work. But if you find any other way, so if you have any suggestions, let me know. We also work on this entropy stabilized alloys, something called high entropy. We can model and all of that. There are some things we have found interesting, but in interest of time, I'm not going to talk about that. And thanks a lot for to a lot of my students and postdoc who has helped with this work. And these four are the ones whose work I am presenting today. And these are some other funding agencies. Thank you.
So very nice. The single atom catalyst that you talked about, did you explore the catalytic reactions afterwards, or you was only doping? Or
so at this point of time, we are only up till here. This is under review. We got some positive response and we are replying to it in JPCC. So that's where we are. But yeah, the plan is to take it further, and because there are already some studies on catalytic effect of single atom. So we first wanted to see that if it stabilizes, then we can of course do along the lines of as people have been trying out.
So in your calculations, you saw these gold as gold atom or gold as gold ion?
Gold as, you want to know the reference, huh?
I want to know whether gold is, when you say gold is placed, right? Electronically, is that gold as gold 0 or gold 1 plus?
No, gold 0, gold 0. So this is single, just gold, neutral gold. And once we place it, and if the barium oxide is doped with the niobium, then that transfer charge, then gold accept charge from niobium, and that stabilizes niobium, as well as now gold binds better at that site. So my idea is this, that I mean, experimentally I have thought through how it could be achieved, but I'm not sure whom to approach to really prove this kind of thing. So assume like barium oxide thin film, and you deposit as thin possible gold as possible, and then you start bombarding this system of let's say single layer gold on barium oxide with niobium or any other transitional metal. We can find out more of them which can help. And the hope is, as they get into these transitional metals get into barium oxide, they would transfer the charge to gold and become stable as, let's say for niobium, it becomes stable as +5. And now in turn, they start binding gold as single atom.
Yeah, for a long time, people have studied these metal support interaction, which is this gold is metal and support is barium oxide or any such niobium oxide or barium niobium or any such system. And so if people study charge transfer with photoelectron spectroscopy and such other things. As far as gold is concerned, experimentally you see gold, charge transfer. And gold you don't see as neutral metallic gold atom. So I just wondered, I was curious, there are several of our friends who do single atom imaging with HADAF imaging, several such techniques. Also by people who do NEXAs and SEXAVs and EXAVs and such kind of experimental work. So I was curious what you see. Now you say that it is neutral.
When I started, it was neutral. But once you dope it, it has accepted charge from the underlying niobium. So niobium initially, assuming that, okay, you dope neutral niobium on a neutral gold, and then the niobium gives away its charge to the gold, and that's how it binds to the surface.
I don't know. It's like so a curious question, that electronegativity of gold versus niobium. So I would expect gold to give electrons.
No, it is accepting. That part I can assure you that it is accepting electron from niobium. So we did this analysis of where is the Fermi level of or the level of gold, and there is an empty level in the gold which can accept the charge, and the niobium electronic level associated with niobium when inserted in barium oxide was much higher, and that's how it gave the charge to gold. Those analysis we did, I don't have presented here, but yeah.
Okay, good. All right, are there other questions?
So Satyesh Bhaiya, this titanium nitride, it is also a metal, right?
Titanium nitride is also metallic. That is, yeah. It is not semiconductor. It does not have any.
Okay. So when we see, like, do you consider and compare even this work functions of these two metals, like titanium is a metal and titanium nitride is also a metal, in order to see at least the electron flow or some that direction? Do you also see? Because I worked on the systems under like plasma conditions again, although I also did not present that titanium nitride and zirconium nitride, and their work potentials were like, work functions were like important under that plasma. But I just wanted to know, like, you are observing actually a clear diffusion of the nitrogen atoms from one metal to the other metal. That's what you are actually observing.
All I'm saying is that okay, because it is metallic, I did not cared about charges created because of nitrogen vacancy formation, because it's metallic, right? So it can adjust its charges as it wants to. It can flow charges as it wants to. All my argument is that if you form a vacancy in titanium nitride, there is a vacancy formation energy which is positive, and if you put that nitrogen into titanium, there is a energy that is released. So that thermodynamic sum of these two numbers is negative. That's all I have seen, but I am not sure if Fermi level per se would affect any of that. I have not considered, but right, okay, I can talk to you and see if that can also play an important role.
Yeah, and already, as Professor Pradeep has earlier pointed out, there were these calculations with calcium oxide and like other kinds of oxides where you will be doping it with a higher metal. For example, if you are considering magnesium, if you dope it with aluminum, people have seen that there will be a charge transfer onto this gold. Like I have simulated with gold clusters, not with single gold atoms, but it was like 13 atom gold cluster or something, where they have clearly observed that there will be electron transfer once you start doping with a higher atom, what to say, like one extra electron containing atoms. Like if you have magnesium, just replace the magnesium with aluminum. If you put that, they automatically see this charge transfer there, and then further this three-dimensional structures will collapse to two-dimensional clusters and these kind of things, and that two-dimensional clusters are generally more reactive and so on and so forth.
But still gold is accepting charge, right?
Yes, gold is accepting charge there as well.
So that's what I mean, that there are some evidences along that line. At least there are substitutional doping done in calcium oxide. There was some paper where they.
Professor Uzi Lindman's group is like also an expert. I mean, their group generally does this kind of stuff.
Okay. So yeah, it is along the similar lines. Only thing we are saying is that you can stabilize even at interstitial site, and it can give out more charges. So if you make substitution, for example, aluminum replacing magnesium only 1 charge, but here niobium can give away 5 charges.
Uzi Landman is also a distinguished professor of IIT Madras. So let me go back to that old problem of electron transfer. So which is niobium and gold system. Great to see that, well, gold is accepting, but is the electron going from niobium?
That is for sure. That is for sure.
So is that a 1:1 thing?
It's a 1:1 thing. So if I deposit only 1 gold, it will only accept 1 charge from niobium. If I deposit 2, it accepts 2 charges. And if I keep doing it till 5, it would accept almost 5 charges.
And so it has to be a sort of a proximal, right? Niobium and gold should come together. There will be some Coulombic something, or
we found that it is most effective. It is at just the subsurface, so as close as possible to the surface.
Okay, so just to make a comment, so this is different from whatever the experiments have shown. It doesn't require to be actually below that. In the case of calcium and others, like you can go like 4 layers below also, still there will be a charge transfer there.
Yeah. So Chaitanya, maybe you can also help me out with this transfer part or dynamics of transfer. All I did is this ground state calculation, right?
I'm just letting you know that this is the possible case probably with the niobium, but for other cases, like they have seen that even if the atom is there very down also, they can transfer.
No, I'm saying that it actually happens for us also. Even if we are at second layer, third layer, it happens. It's just that addition energy numbers decrease.
Okay.
All right, very nice. And so it is. Are there other questions? Okay, so we have taken quite a bit of time, extra time, 21 minutes or so. We started 2 minutes late, so we consumed 18 minutes more than what was planned. Suraj, what about the next month? The planning is very much there, I suppose.
Yes, sir. And September 17th, I guess. So 4 people have agreed. So I have made the list.
Very good. Thank you. So we should probably make this announcement a little more wider. I would like to, irrespective of whatever happens, the thin or thick attendance, it doesn't matter. We will go on, and that is how any program will come up in the course of time. Thank you. It was a very nice, illuminating set of lectures. So thank you very much. And this also initiates some discussion and collaboration. And at the end, if there is some publication that is coming out because of some ideas, it would be immensely beneficial for everybody. Thank you very much. I will, Suraj will have a copy of these lectures in case you want it. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Satish. Thanks.